So today joining us is Dr. Tia Noel Pratt. Dr. Pratt is a sociologist, an educator, a religious scholar, and an inclusion and diversity expert. As a professor, Dr. Pratt is highly regarded by both students and faculty. And most recently, she was nominated for a 2020 Religion News Association Award for Religion Reporting Excellence. So with great pleasure, I'd like to welcome Dr. Tia Noel Pratt. Thank you for joining us today.
Thank you for having me. I'm glad to be here.
So before we get into everything, I like to play a game of rapid fire questions. So pretty light, pretty easy breezy. So just answer whatever is in your head and your heart. Okay, so starting off, nice and light, what is your favorite encyclical?
My favorite encyclical? I don't have one, honestly. I have a favorite pastoral letter, though.
We'll run with that one.
What We Have Seen and Heard, the only pastoral letter to date written by the Black bishops of the United States.
Great selection. A favorite saint?
St. Catherine of Alexandria, a patron saint of educators. And her symbol is the wheel that was used to martyr her, but she didn't die on the wheel. So yes, St. Catherine of Alexandria.
Amazing. Your favorite Bible verse?
My favorite Bible verse? There's so many. I would say the verse from Isaiah about the repair of the breach.
Very nice. This is a slight departure. Who do you think will win the Emmy for lead actress in a limited series?
Oh, Regina King. I'm going to turn over tables if she doesn't win.
She was fantastic in The Watchmen. And the last one is, what is the greatest act of Catholic charity you've ever seen?
Greatest act of Catholic charity I've ever seen. Oh, that's a good one too. Let's go with social service programs. Like here in the United States, there's so many different programs. And those programs are very influential. And even, in Philadelphia, where I live, where I grew up, Philadelphia, the Archdiocese of Philadelphia really invented the Catholic school system. And that's not really a work of Catholic charity, but, that organizational system, it's a big deal. It's no small thing.
Absolutely. That's interesting. So now we can sort of get into it. In terms of your spiritual journey, would you consider yourself a convert, a revert, or you're cradle Catholic?
Definitely a cradle Catholic, from a long line of cradle Catholics. And so while I grew up in Philadelphia, my great-grandmother and my grandfather and his sister, when they were both still pretty young children, moved to Philadelphia from New Orleans. And I still have a lot of family there, various great aunts and uncles and cousins. And I like to say I can't swing a cat in Southeast Louisiana without hitting a relative. So, and our family has lived in New Orleans since well before the Civil War. I have a cousin that lives in the 7th Ward. And somebody in my family has lived in the 7th Ward of New Orleans since at least the mid-19th century. So,
So
a cradle Catholic from a long line of cradle Catholics, yes.
And also they live in what is one of my favorite cities in America. So how would you, knowing that you such a long line of Catholics, how would you say that your faith played a role in your early life, just in your personal formation and where it has led you?
It definitely played a large role in my early life, through growing up, receiving these sacraments, attending Catholic school, all the way through PhD. It's had a huge influence in how I live my life and how I see the world and in the work that I do. It's almost impossible to really separate the two because they're so intertwined.
Can you speak to the discernment process and the curiosity that led you to become an expert in the intersection of race, religion, and the way systemic racism impacts the experience of religion?
Yeah, I like to think it's actually a good story. So I was in high school. So I was a junior in high school, and I was walking through the halls on my way from third period English to fourth period German class. And I thought, I will be a sociology major. I had no idea what sociology was, but I decided in that moment I was going to be a sociology major. And so as I started to investigate what sociology was, it sounded like something that was for me. And I went to an acceptance students day when I had gotten, after I had decided where I was going to go for my undergraduate studies, and sat in on an intro to sociology class. And I thought, this is for me. And the lesson that the professor taught that day around George Herbert Mead's work was a lesson that when I covered that material in Intro to Sociology class, I still used. Um, so that's how I got into sociology. And then as I progressed in my undergraduate studies, I became more and more interested in religion, more and more interested in race and how they intersected. And I really started to figure out that there was this perception that being both Black and Catholic didn't go together. And that was antithetical to me because I come from a family with a long line of Black Catholics. I had spent the early part of my childhood growing up in a parish that was a predominantly Black parish. There were a number of other predominantly Black parishes in Philadelphia, so I knew that didn't go together. That didn't make sense. So to figure out why there was this perception was something I wanted to pursue. And I thought that I would need to study theology in order to do that. And then I realized after doing my homework on it that I could study religion and be a sociologist, that there was this thing called sociology of religion that I could do. And it's one of the difficulties with the discipline is that students don't often realize that sociology of religion is a thing until they get to graduate school. It's not as much a part of the curriculum at the undergraduate level as it should be, which is one of the reasons why I started pursuing public scholarship in the last year or so.
Well, you described wanting to study sociology. You describe it almost as like lightning in a bottle. But when it comes to your actual vocation, as you do it as an educator and working in diversity inclusion, can you pinpoint that moment or series of moments where you could say to yourself that, yes, this right here is what I want to do?
So this goes back to my undergraduate days again. The summer in between my junior and senior years as an undergrad, I participated in a program at University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill, called the Murat Program. And so what the program essentially does is it brings together students who are from underrepresented groups in the professorate and essentially gives them a semester of graduate school while they're still undergrads in the hopes that they will kind of get the bug, and want to pursue a career of research and the life of the mind. And so I came back from that summer in North Carolina, decided that I was going to go to graduate school and pursue a PhD. And so I wound up at Fordham.
When you talk about your writing, something that I find very interesting is you recently launched what you dubbed the living document called the Black Catholic Syllabus. What inspired you to create this syllabus? What's your hope for this living document, and can you speak to its importance to Catholicism?
Yeah, about a year ago, a little more than a year ago, a colleague suggested that I create a public syllabus around Black Catholics. And it was something that, I left kind of in the back of my mind. But this moment, this period really that we're living through, of history that we're living through, that really kind of came alive after George Floyd's murder, it calls us all to concrete action. And I decided that the syllabus was something that I could do as a means of concrete action in response to this period of history that we're all living in. So I decided to launch the syllabus, to curate it, to launch it in order to, you know, continue on in the work that really is, the professional work of my life, to dispel these myths around being both Black and Catholic. So, to have that available, and to be able to direct people when they're looking for something to educate themselves, to learn and to grow, to have that there. And I think of it as a living document, because when it launched, I didn't want anyone to think that that was going to be it. And so, I updated regularly. I realized that, today or tomorrow there's something that could happen, some piece that could come out that's really, urgent and important. And so, I wanted to be able to add that. And also too, with the syllabus, I wanted to, and as it says in the description, to center Black voices. And because, the being able to create our own narrative is so important. And it's something that has not been the standard. And so, another goal of the syllabus, if you will, is for that to become the standard. We need to be to direct the creation of our own narrative.
Mm-hmm. As I'm personally in my journey, I'm more of a reefer. Actually, just completed my RCIA, and to be able to come across this document, I personally cannot thank you enough. I know within it you clarify that you speak specifically often to the African American experience in America, but as a Canadian, I still draw a lot from it, and I definitely want to thank you for it. And it's given me a long reading list of things, but it's great. It's an excellent resource to learn from.
Well, thank you. I'm glad it's doing its work.
Yeah. Well, for what other sort of major, obviously centering is very important to being able to tell one story. There's great power in that. What other sort of takeaways do you hope people get from the Black Catholic syllabus?
I hope that people get from it, the understanding of what systemic racism is, and folks have contacted me and said that there's so much there that, and these ideas and are very new to them, and so they don't know where to start. And so I suggest, if that's the case, that folks start with a couple of items from the public scholarship section, because it's everything not everything, there's maybe one thing that isn't, but for the most part, the items on the syllabus are listed in two places. They're listed as under topic area and type of media. And so I would recommend to folks that they start with a couple of things from the public scholarship section, because those items are very accessible. They're written for a general audience, written by scholars like myself, the historian, Dr. Shannon D. Williams, the theologian, Father Brian Massengale, but written for a general audience. You start there because it's accessible, and then move to Dr. Joe Fegan, who is a sociologist, his chapter on his theory of systemic racism, to give that foundation of what systemic racism is. And for anyone who wants more on systemic racism, they can move to Dr. Fegan's book. And that really kind of gives that foundation. And so, I hope that folks who engage the syllabus, take away from it, one, this perception that there's no such thing as being Black and Catholic is in fact a myth. that that systemic racism has a long history in our church, but there is also a long history of resistance to that systemic racism, and that resistance is ongoing. And to engage with that and to be part of that, because we all have a role to play in the work for justice. And the syllabus is not a substitute for doing the work. It's a place to start. It's a place to learn, to grow, to be in the world.
And just hearing you speak to it like that, it almost seems like it's like almost like a love letter to the church of wanting to make it grow and continue to grow, continue to be better. It reminds me of when somebody had asked Cornel West why he criticized Obama so much, and he said it's coming from a place of love, that he holds him so high, in such high regard and with such love, that he just wants him to be better. So that it definitely feels like this is in that same sort of vein.
It is, and thank you for seeing that. I wouldn't have done this much work if it didn't come from a place of love. If I didn't believe that the church can be its better self, and that it's possible to get there.
Right now in 2020, we have global protests, COVID-19, widespread unemployment. With that zoom in view of now and that view ahead, how do we remain optimistic? How does your faith and your vision of what the world and church could be, how do you maintain that and maintain yours?
I have to be honest, it's very hard. And in some days it's a lot harder than others. A way that I'm able to do that is to lean on my family, my friends, my friends and colleagues who are engaged in this work. People like Olga Segura and Dr. Williams and my dear friend, Sister Cora Marie Billings, who's a Sister of Mercy, and Sister entered the Sisters of Mercy not long after she graduated from high school in the 1950s. She was the first African American woman to enter religious life in Philadelphia. So she and I, we actually graduated from the same high school, and she was a guest at my graduation, and that's how we met. And she's been a dear friend ever since. And so that's really how I stay optimistic, and by seeing the work that others are doing, and to lean on friends and family.
Yeah, and it's the wonderful thing is to see that, even though I thank you for your honesty in saying that sometimes it's hard. It's very easy nowadays for people to just stick to the highlight reel. So I appreciate your honesty and authenticity when answering that. And I respect that you still continue to do the work. Like, for example, right now you are in the midst of writing a book. I have it written down because I kept forgetting the name. My apologies. It's your upcoming book is entitled Faithful and Devoted, Racism and Identity in the African American Catholic Experience. And within your site, you describe it as this project draws on ethnographic data and in-depth interviews to investigate liturgy as a form of identity work, and analyzes how systemic racism in the Catholic Church has resulted in the small number of African American Catholics. This project also addresses parish reorganizations resulting from church closings. It demonstrates that African American Catholics have combined the dual heritages of Roman Catholicism and African American religious traditions such as music, preaching, and commitment to social justice to form a singular identity. Can you, although it's a bit of a work in progress, and I know I've just read a blurb that you had written down, can you share a bit of your book and what your inspiration for writing it, and what's the impact that you hope that it has?
Sure. So the inspiration for writing the book, I back in 2015, I was part of a program called uh, the American Parish Project, which was out of the Institute for Advanced Catholic Studies at USC. And part of that, it was a symposium, and different scholars who work on issues related to Catholicism had come together to share work that we had created for that purpose. And as it was concluding, I thought to myself, you know what? I need to write a book, because I realized I was spending, every time I started a new project, I was spending 20% of the space explaining why Black Catholics are an actual thing that exists in the United States. And I thought, well, if I write a book and I'll spend 20% of the space doing it there, and then I'll never have to do it again. That I'll just say, oh, remember I wrote this book? Yeah, read that. Now let's talk about some new stuff. So really, that's kind of how it came about. And it's been hard. It's been hard because, as I work on the book and I interview people and I hear from them about their own difficulties and experiences and the racism that they have encountered and lived through, and that pain, and then that dredges up my own pain, and then I have to kind of put all of that together and then bring it back out into the world as scholarship. And that's not easy. But it also gives me a certain credibility, a certain perspective that scholars who are not part of the community they study, especially a marginalized community, wouldn't have. And so that is a gift, that is a grace that I am grateful for. So that's kind of how the book came about. And so the book, it does a number of things. One thing that it does is it connects the dots of systemic racism in the United States and using time as a measure. There are other works like Desegregating the Altar by Stephen Ox that concentrate on place, that focus on places like Chicago or Baltimore or New York. Whereas I'm trying to connect the dots through time to show that what was happening in Chicago and Baltimore and Philadelphia and New York, all of these things are happening at the same time to really get at the systemic nature of this, and that these cannot be dismissed as one-off types of incidents. So there's that. And then, I also talk about liturgy, as you mentioned, liturgy as a form of identity work, using things like music, preaching, church aesthetics to really get at how Black Catholics work to create an ethno-religious identity that is just as Catholic as other ethno-religious identities created by Catholics of other ethnic groups. It is no less Catholic than the work of combining ethnicity and religion that Irish Catholics or Italian Catholics or German Catholics have done through the years. Mm-hmm. And it's not always regarded as such. And so one of the things I hope the book does is really kind of lay down how that foundation of how that happens. So those are a few key things that the book does, and also draws on information from folks who have been so generous to share their experiences with me. And I talk about parish closings and church closings and parish reorganizations and how that impacts how that impacts folks. Losing your church home is such a devastating experience, and there are plenty of folks who have gone through it multiple times.
Multiple times. Oh wow.
Yeah.
Well, definitely thank you for sharing that bit about your book. And as being part of the diaspora, but being in Canada, it's definitely sort of different. So as I speak to more American Catholics, it's interesting to some of the things that are revealed, and getting to understand with what you're talking about with how liturgy and that sort of thing is practiced. I had a chance to speak to a father who pastors a church in St. Paul, Minnesota, I believe he's at, and it's at a St. Peter Claver Catholic church and predominantly Black church, and I hadn't seen that, so seeing the different things that were incorporated. So I've a greater grasp of what your work is referring to, and I really look forward to when you complete that. I'll get on the pre-order list.
Thank you.
What wisdom can you offer people who are trying to cultivate and discern their own particular vocational gift?
Yeah, I think the main thing is to figure out what it is that you love, and then it's not necessarily, okay, so if you love teaching, if you love writing, if you love thinking about how the world operates and why the world is what it is, which is something that that always interested me. I gave a talk once when I said, well, when I was 12, I figured out this or that. And I remember my aunt was in the audience, and she said, really, girl? Because, that's what your aunt does. She just, responds in the middle of your talk. And I said, yes, because I'm a born sociologist. I just got the training later in young adulthood. So, and if you love understanding how the world works and why people do what they do, then there are ways to pursue that, as vocation, and then make a career out of that vocation. So that's where I would encourage people to start.
Absolutely solid advice. Again, I want to thank you so much for your time, your expertise. I think you gave our audience a lot to reflect on and a whole lot of books and articles to read. So thank you so much.
Oh, thank you for having me. This has been great.
All right, take care.
You too.